Hello, good afternoon, morning, or evening, depending on where you are watching us. Welcome to another Structuralist Development Macroeconomics Research Group seminar, international seminar. My name is Maria. I'm a SDM Research Group member, and I will be your host for today. So today we have the presentation of the paper From Macro to Micro and Macro Back, Macroeconomic Trade Elasticities in a Developing Economy from Professors Gabriel Palazzo and Martin Rapetti. So Gabriel is a professor at the University of Buenos Aires. He's a doctor in economics from the same university and also from the University Alcalá de Henares, sorry. He is an associate researcher at Equilibra Instituto Interdisciplinario de Economia Política and SEDES. Martin is also a professor at the University of Buenos Aires. He's a doctor in economics from the University of Massachusetts, and he's an associate researcher at SEDES and CONICET in Argentina. So I welcome both of you. Martin is starting with a little introduction of the paper, and then Gabriel will follow a presentation. So just before we start, I want to inform you that you can send comments or questions in the comments section below, and they will be answered after the presentation. So Martin, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you, José Luis, for the invitation. I'm very happy to be here. Of course, I'm in Buenos Aires, but I mean to be part of this seminar that I know several friends of us are here today. So just to give you a little background and sense of what we do in this paper, what we try to provide evidence for. The starting point is something that several of us have been working on. The issue that we see in several countries and several experiences, that having a high level of the real exchange rate, the competitive real exchange rate, I mean high in the South American sense, that high means more undervalue and low, more overvalue exchange rate. Having a competitive or high real exchange rate relates with higher economic growth. This is something that several of us have found in data, in growth regressions, in historical evidence, and there was something that people were skeptic about. Several of our friends and colleagues, in most of them in Latin America as well, that they see that the elasticity, the elasticity relating the real exchange rate, the price elasticity relating the real exchange rate and both exports and imports was relatively low in empirical studies. So that was somehow like contradictory to the idea and the evidence that higher levels of the real exchange rate would correlate with higher economic growth. So something that we tried to do in a previous paper with Gabriel was to show, using the experience of Argentina in the 2000s, which was a very interesting experience because we have an experiment of 10 years before the crisis, having the convertibility regime in which the real exchange rate was relatively low. And then after the crisis, the 2002 crisis, a long period with a high or competitive exchange rate for several years, I would say 8 years, 7 8 years. So that experiment would allow us to see whether we were able to find any appealing evidence of export growth or not. And as I said in a previous paper, we found evidence in key sectors that there were several export surges in especially in sectors that were related to manufactured goods, especially those which were intensive in the use of labor. So in this paper, what we do, and Gabriel will show you the details, is to go further into sectoral behavior to see whether the elasticities relating export and import performance and the real exchange rate are different depending on the type of sectors. And this is important because as Gabriel will show later, it gives you a sense whether the story that it's typical explaining the relation between the real exchange rate and economic growth is whether it is led or not by tradable sectors that are mainly manufactured and intensive in the use of labor. So this is the main question that we try to answer in the paper, and we find evidence which explains that the real exchange rate is an important variable for economic growth, especially because it affects the performance of tradable sectors, tradable activities that use labor and are mainly manufactured. So this is the essence of our question, and the details are going to be introduced by Gabriel now. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you everybody. Thank you, Martin, for the nice introduction. So I'm very happy to be here presenting this paper in front of this audience. I think that probably we are going to have a nice discussion through the chat, but it's still a very nice discussion, and I hope that you find the paper interesting. So, well, Martin already introduced the paper, so I'm going to jump in to the slides. So on this paper that is called From Macro to Micro and Macro Back, Macroeconomic Trade Elasticities in a Developing Economy. And actually, when I start talking about this paper, that why the paper is called in this way is going to become clearer for all of us. So this is the outline of the paper. So first, I'm going to talk a little bit about the motivation and contribution. I'm going to keep it brief because Martin already introduced the paper for all of you. Then I'm going to show the first set of results that this going from macro to micro, what we are meaning with going from macro to micro is because we are looking at a macroeconomic variable, the real exchange rate, how it affects different product import and export products at a very disaggregated level. So we are going from this, we are looking for the effects of this macro variable in different kind of sectors and products, export and import products. Then what we are going to find there is a lot of heterogeneity. So after doing that, we are going to go back to macro and try to calculate the aggregate elasticity, weighting up these very disaggregated elasticities by their share in the Argentina trade basket. No? So we are going to have like this kind of macro-micro interaction and micro and to macro interaction, and then we're going to conclude. So I hope if I'm speaking very fast, please stop me and say, okay, can you repeat? I'm going to try to speak slowly and that my English is clear enough. So the motivation is about this controversy that Martin was talking about. Elasticity, pessimist or optimism, no? Who are elasticity optimists? probably those kind of scholars like Roderick, Frenkel, Bresser Pereira, Martin Rapetti, Peter Scott, Arthur Strasmi, and a lot of different, also probably Oreiro can have a take about this, that they found that an undervalued real exchange rate foster growth. No? So they found like a very robust evidence that having a competitive and stable real exchange rate may foster growth and could be good for the developing of for the development of the countries. So, but then we have other strain of literature that they say, okay, when you estimate the real exchange elasticity of export and imports, you find very low levels in developing countries. So it's it's not very likely that this is the channel why you are finding high that the undervalued real exchange rate foster growth. So we want to do a contribution in this controversy, and we think that more or less we answer this question. No, and the answer is depends. No, elasticity, pessimist or optimist depends for which products. No, so the keyword here is going to be heterogeneity. No, because we are going to find that the real exchange rate affects very differently to different set of products. So this is when we are going from macro to micro. The real exchange rate affects very different to different set of products. So then specializing in different set of products explains different level of aggregate rare elasticity when we weigh up these elasticities by their share in the trade basket, for example, in this case in Argentina. So here is like the key of our contribution. So what are our conclusions? That the productive structure matters for the macro because it's going to determine the level of the aggregate real exchange rate elasticity. But the macroeconomics also matters for the productive structure because different level of real exchange stability or real exchange rates is going to foster different kind of sectors. So this is like the key of our paper. So again, contribution one, no, macro to micro, we find a wide heterogeneity responses of export and exports to the real exchange rate and also to the aggregate demand, but we're not going to talk a lot about that because but it's there in the paper also. We find that the low, medium technology manufacturing sectors have higher real exchange rate elasticity. Here we choose E because it's real effective exchange rate elasticity, but we find that these products, manufacturing products with low and medium and also high technology, show higher elasticity and also differentiated products, much higher than homogeneous products and primary products. Also in those sectors, we found that they are more elastic to the nominal exchange rate, the stability of the exchange rate. So here we have like both part of the stable and competitive real exchange rate policy that a lot of us think that could be good for growth. So this is from macro to micro, no? And now from micro to macro, when we weight individual product elasticity by their share in the Argentina trade basket, the result change, no? Particularly in exports. When we weight with the Argentina trade basket, we find low aggregate rare elasticity in exports, and in imports it's quite high. So why we're getting a very low elasticity in aggregate terms? Because a composition problem, or what we call in the paper a structural bias problem. No, it's because in Argentina we have 60% of our export in primary products, primary and manufacturers related to primary products. So because they have a very low elasticity at individual level, when we weight all the elasticity that we're estimating by their share in the trade basket of Argentina, we are getting a low aggregate level of real exchange rate elasticity. However, the sum of this aggregate rare elasticity of imports and exports are greater than 1. No, so still we have some external adjustment when you depreciate the currency, but it's very asymmetric between export and imports because the imports are going to respond more in aggregate terms than exports. So what is imperial strategy? Well, we're using data from Argentina from 1980 to 2015 at constant dollars. We calculate this at 4 digits of the standard international trade classification, so very disaggregated level. No, we have more or less 500 of products of export and imports. We're using this method that is called mean group method, that actually we calculate all the individual elasticity for all the products. So, but then this method reports the simple average elasticity of the panel of products and do inference using the variance of these elasticities. So actually it's like we're calculating all the elasticity at individual level, at product level, and then we're doing inference with all those estimations. No? We believe that this kind of method has some advantages in terms of methodology terms. No? First, it's robust to slope heterogeneity. Why this is important? Because if you suspect that different kind of product might respond in a very different way to the real exchange rate, you want to control for this. You want to have a method that allows this heterogeneity. Also, because we're estimating all the elasticity, we can recover that individual elasticity and analyze them. So we can do this. We can look which kind of sectors are the ones with the higher real exchange rate elasticity, and also, and I think that this is quite crucial because I like econometrics and I think this is important, prevent reverse causality. Why is that? No, we can think right now in Argentina that we're facing a very heavy drought. No, so in this moment we are going to lose more or less 18,000 million of dollars because of this drought. No, and of course we are getting pressure. The economy is getting pressure in the nominal exchange rate. No, so if finally a devaluation occurs, we are going to see a depreciation, but also a decrease in the export. But that doesn't mean that the real exchange rate doesn't matter. It just means that you have an external shock, and it's preventing you to calculate well the elasticities of the real exchange rate and the response of the exports. So, and why is good this kind of method? Because we are estimating the elasticity of all different products. So only in some products this drought is going to be problematic, but not in all the estimation. So going to the results, no, and this is the first question that we're answering. Do all sector of products respond in the same way to the real exchange rate stimulus, to the depreciation of the real exchange rate? And we think that answering this question, we are building a bridge between pessimists and optimists. No? So this is the equation that we're estimating. No? This is in the left hand of the equation, we have the export, the level of exports in logarithm terms, in constant dollars. Then we have its lags, and we have different kind of control variables. Of course, we have the real effective real exchange rate and its lags. The trade partner GDP in the case of exports. In the case of imports, we're going to have the GDP of Argentina. It's just a proxy of the aggregate demand. And then we have different set of controls that some of them are going to be important, and I'm going to say right now. No, we do in the paper. If you have read the paper, you are going to find a lot of robustness tests, but some of them are more important than others. No, one very important control variable for us is the nominal exchange rate stability. Why is very important? Because we know before Gopinas 2015, but Gopinas 2015 make the points that the prices of exports are invoiced in dollars and are fixed in dollars. So after the depreciation, we're not going to see that the price in dollars of our exports decrease, and then we have a higher demand for the rest of the world. Actually, what we're going to find is that the profit of the exported increase. So this is going to, if then we find that we're increasing our export, is because the exporters are investing more to increase their supply. So this is a supply mechanism, and it's only going to happen. They're only going to invest more if they believe that this new level of profits is going to last for some periods. So then the stability of the exchange rate could be a good proxy for that. So for us, it's a very important contract. Then we have all the contracts I'm not going to delve into, but if you want, we can talk a little bit about the other contracts in the discussion. So this is like our main results for the first set of results. I mean, our main finding for the first set of results. So what we're looking here, no, we have, this is all long-run elasticity for exports. No, the first column is showing the simple average of all the elasticities that we're estimating for all the products. No, then we have the Lyell's classification and Rauch's classification. Lyell's classification shows the elasticity also in simple average by different types of products. No, we have primary products in the second column, natural resource-based manufacturing in the third column, low technology content manufacturing in the fourth column, medium technology in the fifth, and high technology content manufacturing in the sixth. Then the Rauch classification is another classification that classifies between differentiated products in the seventh column. In the eighth column, we have those products that have reference prices in the world market. And in the last column, we have homogeneous products. So what starting for the first column, of course, where we have all the products for the whole sample, we are finding actually a quite high real exchange rate elasticity, no? 0.866. That's not very low, and actually it's quite high. And actually, if we see the evidences from other papers, it's very similar to the elasticity that Heyman and Navajas found for the export of Argentina, from Argentina to Brazil. No, that's interesting. But this is only the simple average of all the products. So, but then if we go to the next column, that is the average elasticity for only the primary products, we find a very low elasticity, and actually it's not significant in statistical terms. No, the same happened with the natural resource-based manufacturing elasticity. We don't find any significant elasticity in that case. But when we start looking at the manufacturing, at the different kind of manufacturing, low technology, medium technology, and high technology, we start finding a high elasticity and statistically significant elasticity. Now, the higher elasticity is in low tech manufacturing, then and quite significant in medium technology manufacturing, and also quite high, but not a lot. But the significance is more or less, but it's okay. I mean, in macroeconomics, we are happy with this kind of significant levels, and we are also finding a very high elasticity. So it's like, okay, when we're looking for all the products, we're having a very high elasticity, and that makes sense because in this kind of classification, the SIT classification, the Standard International Trade Classification, most of the products are manufacturing and less products are primary products. And when we're starting to analyzing, we find what we expect, that actually primary products and natural resource-based manufacturing are less elastic to the real exchange rate, and we have a lot of reason to think that is reasonable. No? And also, when we go to the Rauch classification, we find the same. No, differentiated products are very elastic. Then reference price products are elastic less than differentiated products, and homogeneous products are not elastic. So this is, like, for us, is an important result, because here we are finding all the heterogeneity that we are looking that we were looking for. So we do the same for imports. Here we use other kind of control variable, of course, because we have to control for different kind of things. The most important control variable for us is the trade liberalization that happened in Argentina in 1990. That we opened our economy. So that was our preferred regression. So I'm going to show the results of that regression. And we find more or less the same with higher level of significance in statistical terms. But the first column, we also finding like a high elasticity of the real exchange rate for all the products. Remember, this is the simple average elasticity. It's not that it's not the weighted average elasticity. It's just the simple average elasticity, but it's quite high. And here I'm going to focus in the Rauch classification because I think that the stylized facts seems clear that we are finding a higher elasticity. I mean, in higher in absolute terms because it's negative, but more negative in differentiated products than a quite high but lower than before in reference price products, and also a lower elasticity in homogeneous products. In this case, in the case of imports, we are always finding elasticities that are significant in statistical terms. And this is also might be related with the phenomena that we are studying, because the prices of imports are fixed in dollars. When you depreciate your currency, it's going to be more expensive for the consumer of the country. So it's more easy to substitute your consumption basket because, okay, now it's more expensive, so I will try to consume something that is cheaper. So it makes sense that we're finding this kind of behavior. So as I was saying, those were simple average elasticities. So someone can ask me and ask us, okay, but we're macroeconomists, so we want to know the aggregate effects of these elasticities to the whole country, So yeah, the question is, what will be the aggregate real exchange rate elasticity if we weight them by Argentina's trade basket? But we also can ask what will be the aggregate real exchange elasticity if we have a different productive structure, for example, the world's trade basket. So that could be interesting because, I mean, we are economists with a very heavy specialization in natural resources. So if we believe that for developing our countries, we should diversify our productive structure, it could be interesting to see the difference. And actually, we find very different results. And the bias is because of the productive structure. So this is our second set of results. That here actually is where we believe we are building this bridge between optimist and pessimist. So how we can read these tables? We have it in the left panel, we have the imports. The results for imports. In the right panel, we have the result for exports. The first column of each panel is referring to which elasticities we are showing the calculation. So first, I'm talking about the real exchange elasticity for imports and the GDP elasticity for imports. And in the second panel for export, I'm going to talk about the real exchange rate elasticity for export and the trade partners GDP elasticity also for exports. So then I have, this is because I stole this paper. I stole this table for the paper, but I have different regressions and controls in the second column. But the first line is our preferred regressions in all the settings. So in the case of imports, our preferred regression is the one that controls for the trade liberalization of the 90s. And in the case of export, our preferred regression is the one that controls for the nominal exchange stability of the exchange rate. So I'm going to talk about only those results of our preferred regression in each case. So what happened when we weight the individual products elasticity of the imports to the real exchange rate? Well, actually, in the case of imports, we get more or less a similar elasticity that we were getting when we were looking to the simple average elasticity. So and actually, when we wait for the for the world's trade basket, the results are more or less the same. And why is that? Because our import basket is more or less diversified. I mean, we don't have a very high specialization in the sense of we are importing a lot of this kind of stuff, products, and whatever. So the results doesn't change a lot, but change a lot when we're looking at the export elasticity of the real exchange rate. Actually, when we weight our our estimated individual elasticities that were quite high in the simple average calculation, here is quite low. Why? I mean, makes totally sense because we are specialized in that kind of products, primary products and natural resource-based manufacturing that have very low elasticity at the individual level. So it's like, okay, in this sense, the pessimists are right, because yes, you can't expect a very huge response of export of aggregate export after a depreciation. But what happened when we wait by the world's trade basket? It multiplies by 3 almost. We're getting a quite high elasticity. It goes to 0.73. So this distance between the calculation using our Argentina trade basket and the world trade basket for us is a structural bias. It's because our economy is underdeveloped in these key sectors, or people said that are key sectors that are manufacturing, low, medium, high manufacturing or differentiated products. So for us, this is like a key result. But of course, I mean, if we want to say who is right, pessimist or optimist, I think that we are looking to different questions. Optimist is saying, okay, keep your real exchange rate under value, competitive and stable, and you are going to foster this very special sector, modern tradable sectors that are going to foster economic growth. Yeah. And the pessimists are looking at the different aggregate level. No, they say, okay, but when you depreciate, you are not seeing that you are having a boom in export. But of course, because the sectors that are growing are sectors that are small at first. So it makes totally sense that we are finding both results at the same time. And we think it could be a nice result to highlight. So conclusions. No? First, very heterogeneous elasticities, and heterogeneous for Argentinian and Spanish speakers are very difficult words to pronounce in English, but very heterogeneous elasticities. No, for us, the results of this paper is important to think about what is the macroeconomic environment that is helpful according to the international economic specialization that is desired. No? I mean, if we have a vision about which kind of economy we think is better for growth, this is like an important result. Elasticity pessimist or structural bias, both. No, I mean, we have some sectors underdeveloped, and that's why we are finding a low aggregate real exchange elasticity in the case of export. So for us, it's like productive structure matter for the macro, for the macroeconomics, and the macroeconomics matter for the developing of the productive structure. No? And of course, I'm here presenting a very brief insight of the paper, but we have a lot of robustness tests in the papers and other kind of results that we discuss in the paper. So that's all. Gracias in Spanish, and thank you very much for everything.
Okay, thanks for Martin Rapetti and Gabriel Palazzo to accept the invitation to be today on this webinar, this very interesting webinar. I take a brief look on the paper. I didn't finish to read, but I take attention on the Gabriel Palazzo's presentation, and I have some specific and some general comments. Let us start with the general comments. I think that the issue of your paper inserts itself in a more broad issue for us in Latin America, which is the development model. I think that it is the same in Brazil and Argentina, what the development model should be. There are ones that privilege inward development based on the growth of domestic market, right? I think that is the view, the mainstream view of Lula's administration, is the idea that we have to resume growth by increasing the domestic market, increasing wages, increasing consumption, and the increase in consumption will stimulate investment, and so on and so forth. All right. Well, we attempted this from 2006 to 2014, but it did not work. Okay, we have permanent industrialization, and we have a crisis 2014 to 2016 that was basically under my point of view, was basically a profit squeeze crisis of accumulation that was made by this model. And the other guys, the good guys, which means us, that believes that premature industrialization can only be reversed if we, in Latin America, start to gain external markets. And in order to gain external markets, to gain share of the manufacturing markets, external manufacturing markets, we need a competitive real exchange rate. I believe that all of us three have the same idea, that development, which means increasing the manufacturing share in output, demands competitive real exchange rate. Of course, other things too, but this is very, very important. So the question of the elasticity pessimism is one of the points in the debate between these two views about the development model. The ones that do not believe in an outward development model says that, well, for Latin America, a real exchange rate does not work because, well, the elasticity pessimism is one argument, but there are other arguments. For instance, well, exports are low, very low share of GDP. So even if you can increase exports by devaluation of real exchange rate, the impact on GDP will be lower. But since real devaluation of exchange rate will imply, at least in the short to medium term, a reduction in the rate, in the wage rate, this means that the domestic consumption will fall, and the net effect of increase in exports and the reduction in consumption will be close to zero. So there is no argument, there is no reason to have a exchange rate, competitive real exchange rate, and considering that in order to achieve a real competitive real exchange rate, you have to increase inflation. and I believe, without being an expert about Argentinian economy, that many of the problems that we're facing now regarding balance of payments were due to the attempts of the former Argentinian governments to control inflation by means of exchange rate overvaluation. I believe that I'm not be unfair with the Argentinian history. Okay, these are the major issues. Well, regarding the results of the econometric model, the first question that I want to raise is the following: when you estimate the average of income or price elasticity of exports and price elasticity of imports, the sum of them is larger than 1. So even your aggregate estimates, even if your aggregate estimates, the Marshall-Lerner condition is satisfied. So there is no reason for elasticity pessimism according to the aggregate estimates. Yeah, I take note that the aggregate estimate for price elasticity of exports was 0.86, and the aggregate estimate for price elasticity of imports was minus 1.04, since you have to sum the mode without the sign. So the sum will be 1.9. So it's a very high response of the trade balance. You know, that's what the Marshall-Lerner condition says. What should be the sum of the elasticities in order for a real exchange rate depreciation to increase net exports, and even for aggregate estimates in Argentina, the Marshall-Lerner condition is satisfied. So there is no reason for elasticity pessimism. Well, my second point is regarding the estimates of the real exchange rate elasticity of manufacturing exports according to technological intensity. You show that the elasticity of real exchange rate reduces with the technological intensity. It's higher for low tech manufacturing exports, middle term for the medium technological manufacturing goods, and a little lower for high tech manufacturing goods. Well, this result is more or less the same which I have obtained in a paper published in 2020 in the Paulo Silus Labini Quarterly Review with Luciano Gabriel and another fellows. We do not disaggregate or aggregate data, but panel data on a sample of, I believe, more or less 60 countries, developing and developed countries, and we estimate a growth regression in which the per capita real growth rate was the dependent variable, and we have a lot of control variables, and one of the control variables is precisely the technological gap, and the index of undervaluation of real exchange rate developed by Hadrick in his paper of 2008. So what we conclude is that the effect of the undervalued exchange rate over the growth rate of real GDP per capita depends on the technological intensity or the technological gap. You know, for low technological gap, the effect of undervalued exchange rate over real per capita growth is lower than for high and extremely high technological gap. So it seems that real exchange rate undervaluation is important for countries that are more or less far away from the technological frontier, which makes completely sense. If you are very far from the technological frontier, then the non-price competitiveness of your exports are very low. So you have to compensate your non-price competitiveness by means of increasing your price competitiveness, and that's precisely the role of the real exchange rate. Maybe you cannot compete with Germany in cars or in capital goods, but you can compete with Germany in shoes, for instance. So, but for these two cores, you have the shoes that you produce and export have to be cheaper than the shoes of made in Germany. Well, so far as I know, the shoes that are made in Germany are the best in the world, but we can compete if you have the sufficiently competitive price. So that's for me, it is relevant. Okay, but now an observation regarding economic policy. As you say in the introduction, one of the mechanisms by which a competitive real exchange rate can boost economic growth is to increase the profit rate on the tradable sector. Okay, that's true. But the problem is that when you devaluate the exchange rate, you also increase the profit rate in the commodities production sector. We saw this in Brazil in the last 2 years due the COVID-19 crisis and then the Ukraine war. This produced, as you know, a supply shock, which means that the international price of soybeans goes up, but at the same time that the international price of the soybeans goes up, we have the devaluation of our currency to US dollars, which means that the producers of soybeans gains from two sides. They received a higher US price or price in dollars for the soybeans they produce, but they also gains more domestic currency for each dollar that they received. Well, I'm telling that because the grandfather of my wife is a producer of soybeans, and he make a lot of money in the last 2 years. And here in the center west of the country, where Brasilia is located, is the region of the high scale production of soybeans, and contrary to the rest of the country, here in the center west, the economy is growing, and there is no you see the prosperity wherever you want. So my question is about economic policy is a provocation, of course, but in order to achieve the productive differentiation that that we want for Brazil and Argentina, I think that we have to impose some export taxes over primary goods. Because if we don't, I do not think that the profit rate, the increase in the profit rate in the tradable manufacturing sector will be enough to redirect investments from the tradable primary sector to the tradable manufacturing sector. That's the point. We have to change the intersection profit rates in order to favor investment in tradable manufacturing sectors. And the question is, with high prices for primary goods, combine it with undervalued exchange rate, we are doing it exactly the opposite. You are sending a signal for the private sector that is extremely profitable for you to invest in the expansion of the primary sector. I see this with my own eyes. I see in the family of my wife, and here in the Center West, people are just thinking in the agribusiness that you have to increase the crops. So they are tired of environmental regulation. That's because that's the reason that they supported Bolsonaro both in 2028 and in the last elections. Well, that's my comments.
Thank you very much, Jose Luis. I don't know if Martin wants to go first.
I think, Jose Luis, first, thank you for your kind comments. But the key question is whether your father-in-law shares some of the profits with you or not. That's the key question here.
No, well, today was my wife's birthday, and he already sent some money for her as a gift.
So we can live with that then.
Yes, I share a little of the rent of the soybeans production.
Okay, so no, let me go back to your first comment, and which of course I share your view. We all know that regarding the place that this contribution that Gabriel and I made regarding the overall view on economic development. Now that I'm more inclined into policy questions, I think I would like to reframe your first comment more on economic policy terms. In Latin America, in Argentina, and Brazil, everywhere, there are always policy questions regarding the exchange rate. The exchange rate is a key variable that depends essentially, the nominal exchange rate, on the central bank decisions. So it's a very important question for economists whether this variable, now adjusted by the price movements, so I'm referring now to the real exchange rate, is relevant or not for economic growth. Why I'm saying this? Because here, this topic is a topic in which there is a bridge between macroeconomic policy, which is typically one course in the in the economic curriculum, and economic development. So central bank decisions, which are always seen as a short-term issue, the question is whether they have long-term consequences or not. And I think seen in this way, the debate on the role of the real exchange rate is very relevant for economic policy purposes. I think what we find, our paper, but several of other papers, are showing us that the real exchange rate matters for economic growth. So central bankers, be aware that what you decide essentially for short-term purposes and essentially for inflation control, which is very clear in the case of Brazil, for instance, right? And this is interesting because it doesn't depend whether the government is a right-wing or left-wing government. The central bank always look at inflation, raise the interest rate, appreciate the exchange rate, and has this decision has consequences for
Martin, the central bank is the fourth power, is the fourth power in the Brazilian state.
I can agree with that statement, I think. But so this is very important, and this is important in this regard. We are used to look at macroeconomic models, and we usually do this by having simple models, and typically these models are one sector model, two sector model, or in a very strange case, three sector models. I think our contribution, Gabriel and our contribution is important, or what I think is important is that what we show is that, look, the exchange rate is not, first, we know that it's not irrelevant, it's not neutral. This is something that we know already from previous research from us and from several of us, right? But it's important for specific sectors, which are, in our view, very important for economic development purposes, because those sectors, which are essentially tradable sectors, which use labor and do more complex type of goods, are those who are more affected by exchange rate movements. This is what our finding, our research shows, and this is important for economic development purposes, and of course for macroeconomic policy, because if you now know, if a central banker knows that his or her decision affects key sectors of the economy for long-term purposes, this is something that is, I think, an important contribution. So this is something that I think our paper shows, and I think it's an interesting and valuable contribution. Let me now move to your question on the export taxes. It's a very difficult question, because I think one can deal with this question in an abstract sense, but then you have a real economy in a real time, in a specific moment, and you have political economy issues. So it's really difficult to address this issue. My view on export taxes is that it may be helpful, but it's not the key issue for development. I would prefer a country having a more stable economy, a more stable exchange rate policy, and of course real exchange rate, rather than having or not export taxes. I think this is secondary in terms of economic policy, but then it depends on the specific country, because now in Argentina we have export taxes for several years. You cannot remove those taxes overnight, even if you want, because of fiscal issues, and if you have a country like Brazil that you have, if you don't have export taxes, imposing export taxes may trigger political economy responses that may affect your economic performance in the short and medium term. So it's a very complicated issue, which I think it has to be addressed on specific circumstances. So it's really hard to me to deal with it just in a very abstract sense. But this is, of course, my 2 cents, and I let Gabriel to say what he has in mind. Thank you, José Luis, again for your invitation and for your comments.
Great. Well, thank you again, and thank you for the comments. I'm going to answer first the more technical stuff. No, so I don't know if Daniel is there, and we can share my slides again. If I can say this, okay. Thank you very much. So first of all, when you were saying that
What's
the
first tables?
No, wait, no, yes. But first here that we have
Okay.
the aggregate rate elasticity. When we weight them by the Argentina trade basket, we have a greater elasticity than 1. So Marshall Lerner satisfied. But actually in the paper, we argue that because we believe that in the case of X, where we are estimating a supply elasticity, being higher than 0 is enough to the trade balance to improve. So there is the discussion in the paper, but it's not as high as you say when it's 1 plus 1 in absolute terms the sum of the different elasticities.
I know, but the table that I'm making, yes, this one. No, another, the first one.
This one.
This one. You know, here, when you say all products, I presume that is the elasticity of exports is 0.8676, isn't it?
But in simple average, it's the simple average of all the products, but not when you weight by the share of that product in the.
Okay.
Yes, that's the trick.
Okay. Now, okay, because I have understood that you have made a regression, an aggregate regression, and it is the aggregate.
No, it's this regression using this mean group that actually calculates all this the elasticity of all the products separately, and then calculate the simple average and perform inference of the simple average. Now it's quite tricky. My explanation probably wasn't that good, and actually it's quite tricky because it's not very. It's a econometric method that it's not necessary that you know it. So I should explain better. So the other thing that I want to say.
Now it's understood.
The other thing I want to say is about the technological gap that you were saying. Actually, yes, we find that, but this is something that I reserve for the appendix. That why we think that this is the case, because we believe that the products that respond most to the real exchange rate and those that are labor intensive. And here I'm estimating the different elasticity by groups, by quintiles of labor intensive in different kind of sectors. And we find actually that, for example, this is in the case of X for the left plot, the most labor intensive is your sector, the higher is going to be the response. And probably that is the case in low technology manufacturing and medium technology manufacturing, and it's not the case in high technology manufacturing, or at least is less important the labor in that case, and other kind of inputs are important. So here is another thing that is important for the third question that I think you were asking, that is, okay, the profits in the primary products are increasing because of the depreciation, and that's true, but we believe that increase more in labor-intensive sectors. Why? Because the labor in that sectors is more important in their production function, and labor is a non-tradable factor. So when the relative price between tradables and non-tradables increase, it's because the non-tradable, you are favoring further the sectors that use that kind of factor. So we believe that the profit increase more in this sector. So that's why we think that these sectors respond more, and actually we find that in exports, than primary products and natural resource products. Actually, Martin.
No. Just one comment. Actually, you could argue, and several people from the agriculture sector argues, and I think with good reason, that the exchange rate is not a very relevant variable for the profit rate, because in essence, they have a price which is tradable, and they have also inputs in the production function which are tradable. So a depreciation,
yeah,
exactly, it doesn't change profitability. On the contrary, as Gabriel was saying, the relative price between tradable and non-tradable, when you have non-tradable inputs, mainly labor, it does affect your profit rate. But of course, when you have a depreciation of the currency, in the case of an agriculture producer, the purchasing power of those profits, the same profit rate, but the value of the profit, of course, buys much more non-tradables now than before. And that's why your grandfather was so happy, because he could buy much more dinners in restaurants than before, but it didn't change probably that much the profit rate.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. Actually, yes. The next thing that I was going to say is something related to this, but also, I mean, of course, if you have people that are tradable producers that are in the frontier of the technology and are very relevant for your country, and in some moment there is a depreciation and they're getting a lot of money for that, there could be political reason why you say, okay, it's okay to put taxes to exports. Probably it's better to put taxes to profits. So if you are getting high profits, it's better to not to export and the value of the exports. So it's better to take account of the cost. But it's not, I mean, in Argentina, this is not the case. I mean, we put export taxes after the devaluation of 2002, and in that moment could make sense, because we were in a very big social crisis and socioeconomic crisis and political crisis, and there is going to be only one sector that is going to be much more or less better in that moment, and a lot of people was suffering in that moment. So in that moment makes sense. But right now that, for example, we have a high level of export taxes, who knows if this level is optimal or is not optimal, or I mean, it's a bigger question. It's a bigger question that we should respond thinking actually in something that we are studying with Martin in Equilibra about stabilization plans. So we have to think about the fiscal cost of all the measures, because that might be very important to reduce inflation and to do a stabilization plan in the future. So in Argentina, it's a hot topic because we're in a very volatile economy, and it's complicated. So that's my answer. So thank you very much again.
Regarding the Argentine economy, I have a question. I think that you have a balance of payments problem, isn't it? How is your current account deficit?
No, now we have a balance of payment problem because of the draw. But am I using the right word for sequía? Yes, right?
Draw, yes, yes.
Yes. So that in essence reduce our exports in 20% 1 year. So it was a terrible supply shock in essence. But we are not running a big balance of payment problem, but mostly our current account was balanced or even in surplus in
The
recent
reserves?
years.
The
Reserves
reserves?
are running out because of a confidence crisis. It's mostly we have a capital controls and we have exchange rate controls. This is because people, contrary to Brazil, people save in foreign currency, dollars actually. So when you have a confidence crisis, everyone run to buy dollarized assets. And that's the key issue. It's more of a capital account crisis rather than a current account crisis, right?
So, because what I'm thinking about the Brazilian economy in the 80s, when we face the so-called impossible adjustment, because we have, as you know, an external debt problem that, in
Yeah.
order to be managed, demands real exchange rate, a competitive real exchange rate, which means that the nominal exchange rate had to be devalued more or less in line with the difference between domestic inflation and US inflation. But we also had a high inflation. So
Yeah.
in order to reduce the inflation, you have to reduce the rate of exchange rate devaluation. But if you reduce the rate of exchange rate devaluation, then you will have problems with the balance of payments problem, and you will not be able to pay the service on the external debt. So during many, many years in the 80s, we faced this dilemma. We cannot make a simultaneous adjustment in the external side and the inflation problem. So that's why all the plans, stabilization plans in the 80s failed. Because when we made the Cruzado plan, for instance, mainly we do a huge exchange rate overvaluation. And in 2 years, less than 2 years, the country bankrupt. Our reserves go to zero, and we have to declare default on our external debt in 1987, just a few months after the Cruzado plan. And
I agree. That's something that happened to several Latin American countries. The impossible adjustment problem was something that Argentina faced, Brazil, Mexico, and probably others. Not so much Colombia or Chile, but that's something similar. Of course, when you have to stabilize, you need one price to lag behind the others, and that's typically the exchange rate. And for that, you need to have some external buffer, even on reserves or on the current account. And that's why only in the 90s we could stabilize, because we have capital flows coming into the region, and that's something that it's key for stabilization. It's not an easy time for Argentina to stabilize now that capitals are turning back to the north. So this is a dilemma that we can make another seminar on that. It could be very interesting.
Because when you have an inflation rate of 3 digits per year, it's very, very difficult to reduce the inflation. We have to make that shock, you know.
Yes.
We made it finally in the 90s. But we ended inertial inflation by super indexing the economy with the URV. So it's just the other way around. Instead of prices, we made a super indexing of prices, and to make an instantaneous alignment of relative prices, and then put another currency called real, and the problem simply disappears. But I think anytime I think that you have to make it.
Yeah, but in the end, the real plan is the same, because you are actually fixing the fixing prices to the new unit of account, which is the URB, and the URB was actually more or less fixed to the US dollar, right? So in essence, it was also an exchange rate fixation.
Yes, but with the super indexation, you can solve the problem of disequilibrium of relative prices. That was a problem that with all other previous stabilization plans failed because they failed to deal with the disequilibrium relative prices.
This issue is actually a very interesting issue that you raise, and we are of course talking about something completely different from the paper, but it's very interesting if there are students out there. What you just said, José Luis, relates a lot to Oliver Blanchard's tweet on inflation and conflict claims. When you have high inflation, relative prices are moving so much, you actually have a very stressed political income distribution problem. Because when you have to stop, relative prices are moving all the time, and you have to fix a new system of income distribution. And you have always political pressure because someone will be probably left behind and will raise its hands and say, "Hey,
yes,
my relative price is low," and so stopping inflation when it's high and relative prices are so volatile is solving a political problem. An income distribution problem, right? So it's a very difficult issue, and for that you need in the end a strong political power. But that's another topic and another webinar.
Okay, but it's a very interesting theme,
Of course,
and it's unfortunately to see again Argentina facing the problems that Argentina had 40 years ago. It's not a good thing to see, but
it's not good for us, but for you it's cheap to come here, so you can come and spend your reais here.
yes, the rents
Of course. Bring your father-in-law.
Okay, people, so I think that it's time to finish. I would like again to Gabriel Palazzo and Martin Rapetti to have accepted the invitation to present today webinar. And let me read again about the paper from macro to micro and macro back, macroeconomic trade elasticities in a developing economy. I think that the questions that was debated today was very important for designing a development policy for Latin American countries, and Brazil and Argentina. I think it's very important. Okay, so people have a very nice weekend, and see you in anytime. Right? Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye bye. Un abrazo.
Thank you very much.
Nos vemos.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.